Okay, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stephen Childe, and I'm here to introduce the next session, which is Enterprises Reducing Carbon. We've got two great speakers this afternoon. In a moment, I'll just introduce my co-chairperson, but first, just a word about myself. I'm with the university. I'm an engineer who traditionally worked in manufacturing and engineering management. And over the years, I've gradually moved more into the problems that companies are facing, which have been things about reducing waste. And that has gradually been taken over and increased into people thinking more and more about reducing their greenhouse gas emissions and their carbon footprint. So I'm working on that in Plymouth Business School. And one of the people who I've actually met and worked with on a project about reducing carbon emissions is my co-host, Paul Gilbert. And I'll let Paul introduce himself and then our first speaker.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Steve. Hopefully you can see me. Yeah, as Steve says, I've been working in supporting businesses with their sort of sustainability journey for probably over 20 years now, and focused really heavily on the last 3 years, specifically helping enterprises get on the journey to net zero and looking at how they can reduce their carbon. And it's really interesting having sort of listened to Professor Mike Berners-Lee's presentation. It's clear that we are in a crisis, and it's clear that sort of enterprises and individuals, we need to act. So yeah, really looking forward to this session this afternoon. To get us going, we're really privileged that we've got Kirsty Wavish, who is the Sustainability Manager at the University's Hospitals NHS in Plymouth. She's been there for 16 years and done some really great work. And Kirsty's going to just sort of do a 20-minute presentation on their JUMP platform and how the trust is actually using that to change behaviour, reduce costs and reduce carbon. So Kirsty, welcome, and over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Right, so I will just try and share my screen. And hopefully you can see that. So good afternoon. My name is Kirsty Wavish. I am the Sustainability Manager at University Hospitals Plymouth. I've been in the role officially now for about 3 years. Prior to that, it was sort of badged onto my role just as sort of an extra. So it's only been in the last 3 years that we've actually started making officially some strides in our sustainability journey. So today I thought I'd talk to you a bit about our Choosing Greener programme. For those that don't know what that is, it comes from a sustainable behaviours engagement platform that's hosted by a company called JUMP. We engaged them a couple of years ago because we were looking at trying to influence the sort of sustainable behaviours of our staff within the trust. Obviously, we have our green plan where we have multiple objectives and targets to reduce our carbon emissions. But one of our biggest challenges will be changing the culture and the behaviours of our staff, and also influencing our patients and the public that we come into interaction with. So previously we have conducted various behaviour change initiatives, but it's often been quite difficult to maintain the momentum just because of the resource that goes into having to keep those projects afloat. We constantly get feedback from staff about interest in sustainability, and that's been going on for a number of years now. But they're often unsure where to start. They don't really know how to get their ideas across. There's obviously a resource issue. Often a lot of this stuff is still regarded as nice to do. So it's having that ability to be able to give them a platform where they can start to share ideas, and for us to give them tips and suggestions on what they can do to reduce their own carbon footprint within their personal lives, but also in their workplace environment as well. Often as well, our campaigns were focused on specific sustainability issues, waste, one in particular, and the reducing sort of single-use plastics. So there was never really a holistic approach to sustainability, and just sort of consisted of those singular projects. So we were very aware that we needed to identify a sort of consistent approach, and sort of that kind of platform where we could start to sort of share those messages across the entire organization. So back in 2021, we engaged with Jump, and they offered a platform which really did tick a lot of the boxes that we were looking for. It's accessed via an internet browser, or you can download an app onto your phone, and then staff can start to complete sustainable actions that are suggested on the programme, and they earn green points for each of the actions that they get involved with. So I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment, but some of the aims of this programme was obviously to get across the understanding of sustainability across the trust, promote that behaviour change with a bit of fun as well. It's a game of, it's through this sort of gamification platform, and it really is quite fun. It gives that positive work culture as well, and creates a bit of competition between teams and individuals as well. There is a forum for staff feedback as well, and ideas on sustainability. It does communicate the aims and objectives of our Trust's Green Plan. In particular, I've just popped down the two main targets within our Green Plan, which are national targets in the NHS. So that's to reduce the Trust's carbon footprint by 80% by 2032 and achieve net zero by 2040. And then the carbon footprint plus. So just to give an idea of what that means. So the NHS carbon footprint is usually scope 1 and 2, everything that's within our direct control for carbon emission reduction. Footprint plus is then those that includes our wider supply chain, where we do have indirect control, but we have influence. That target is 80% by 2039 and achieve net zero by 2045. So the ways in which the programme helps to achieve some of those targets, so particularly travel, there's a focus on that and reducing business travel emissions, procurement, so reducing paper usage, food waste, single-use plastics, product packaging, switching to plant-forward diets. Waste, big one on waste in terms of reducing the volume of waste generated, increasing recycling rates, moving to reusables, all that sort of stuff. And then biodiversity as well, so improvements to our green spaces, looking after our green spaces, taking account of our air quality, climate change adaptation, and well-being comes into that as well, because obviously that's a very important part as well, engaging with nature. So the platform is sort of split into different areas where staff can engage with. So our particular ones, which we've built ourselves, are under sort of travel, energy, carbon, reduce, reuse, recycle, and getting involved. On top of that as well, we've got activities for our green champions to get involved with. There are monthly initiatives, and then the Nature Nurtures Challenge, which is the campaign going on at the moment, which looks at the biodiversity, how we're engaging with wildlife, litter picks and all that kind that sort of nature sort of focused activities. So as you can see from the slide up, there's just sort of a couple of our current activities that staff can get engaged with. Woolpit, we have a reuse and redistribution network where staff can reuse items that they don't no longer need in their department, whether that's furniture or stationery. This is been especially useful this year with us having to really look at our finances and reducing that. So really starting to consider what we've got in our departments, whether or not we need it, and whether things can be used elsewhere. So that was launched in November. So that's been successful so far. Obviously, in a clinical environment as well, we've had the Gloves Off campaign, which was in May, just spreading that awareness of hand hygiene and not necessarily needing gloves, but also the environmental impact of that as well. And obviously, there's a cost associated with the gloves that we purchase as well. So obviously, reducing that will thus reduce carbon emissions from the purchase of those, but also the incineration as well. Moving to sustainable alternatives. So again, things like, moving to a reusable cup, moving to a reusable bottle, and giving sort of ideas of where staff can do that. Recycling quiz, which is always a big one. Waste is at the center of my heart because it's been something I've been doing for a very long time. So it's trying to get that proper education about what can and can't be recycled. There's lots of wish cycling going on. I think that's a nationwide thing, that people hope that things can be recycled, but quite often a lot of the things that we do put in recycling can't be recycled. So it's getting that education out to staff, which in turn does affect the way that they recycle at home, albeit depending on where they live and what kind of recycling process that they have at home. But it still gets that point across about what can and can't be recycled, and also then engages in terms of whether or not we could then switch to sustainable alternatives if it's things that couldn't either just be reused or recycled. So moving on, we have a leaderboard. I mentioned earlier about the competition element, which does sort of give some motivation across the organisation. Staff are split into teams, which are dependent on their department. So that's they're incentivised through earning green points to win prizes every month. And then every 6 months, the top performing team is announced and a donation is made to the Trust's hospital charity on their behalf, which is ring-fenced for sustainability projects. So that's been a really good one, and certainly has sort of been good in terms of that motivation across the organisation. So in terms of communications, I mean, this is our hardest part in the organisation, how we get these messages out to staff. So quite often we come across people who still aren't aware that we have a green plan. And ultimately, with 10,500 staff, it's a very, very big group of people to try to engage with. So we have multiple things that we do try to do with our staff. We've got posters that go out. We try to advertise the Choosing Greener programme as much as we possibly can. You'll see there, so we've got one of our posters, also the Choosing Greener platform page where staff can see, how they're getting on. So it gives them an idea of how much they've contributed, how much CO2 they've avoided as a result of the actions that they've taken, and how many points that they've gained as a result. We have newsletters that go out on a monthly basis, and that focuses on some of the key points that we're pushing on a particular month. So the one that we've just had, we've sort of included No Mow May and some of the nature nurture challenges that we had going on in that month as well. We've got Plastic Free July coming up in July. So again, some of the activities will be focused around those. We also have our own Twitter page where we try to keep that up to date and encourage, again, to get staff involved with that. We have Green Champions, who, again, part of their role is to promote the Choosing Greener programme and try and embed those behaviours within their department. And then one thing that we've launched this year as well is our sustainability green boards. So that's notice boards that we now have up in some of the areas across the organisation. That's been really helpful in as much as not all of our staff obviously communicate electronically. So where we have messages going out, there's a large number of staff that we obviously miss because of that. So trying to get those monthly messages, this board is changed on a monthly basis to keep it current. So we do that, and everything that we've got going on that particular week links back to the Choosing Greener programme, so we can sort of monitor engagement that way. So just to give you an idea of our impact in numbers, so these are some of the figures that we've managed to get out of the programme. So between February 2023 and January 2024, as you can see, there was a significant amount of points that were gained in that period. And it splits it down. So you've got the switch off, which is all of our energy activities, the waste ones, using reusable cups and bottles, vegetarian days, being active, and using sustainable travel. So a lot of that then correlates into waste avoided, and then the CO2 that's saved as a result. one that I particularly like on the waste one is the waste that we've avoided in weight of Labradors. So we saved 392 in that particular year. So it's just, again, giving that context, so it makes people understand how they're saving. CO2 doesn't mean an awful lot to the majority. So, you know, to be able to give some context on what that actually means does help with the understanding. Also, as well, the average homes powered for a day in terms of some of the switch off categories as well. The weight of saved cups and bottles, the baths of water saved, which is an interesting one on the vegetarian days, just in terms of the amount of water that goes into that industry. Being active as well, so how many points that people have, how many minutes of exercise people have done, again, looking after their health and well-being. And then the sustainable travel as well, which another good way to put it into context is the journeys from Plymouth to London. So it's been really helpful. That's been a really good way to communicate some of these to our staff. And just in terms of like the justification for having the programme in place, this has been good for whenever we've come to a renewal point and we can show some of the impact that it's having. And although a lot of this will also be savings that staff will be making in their personal lives, it does correlate through to the workplace as well, as they sort of change those behaviours on a personal level. We also survey staff on an annual basis about the Choosing Greener programme and how they're getting on with it. So we've had some good results, most of which have said that as a result of the actions that they've taken through the programme, they have become part of their daily and weekly routines, which is really, really good to hear. Also, that understanding about the impact of their actions on the environment, and being more conscious about waste, energy use, sustainable methods of travel, and sort of trying to avoid single-use plastic and plastic products. So that's been really helpful to keep monitoring on an annual basis. So some of the benefits from the programme, obviously a reduction in carbon emissions and cost savings. And as you can see from some of the figures before, that has been going well. It integrates with quality improvement projects. We use the Choosing Greener programme in a lot of the things that we do with departments, where we've launched sort of quality improvement projects in particular departments. The Choosing Greener programme is always there in the background, trying to get staff to engage with that, to give them an understanding of how their contribution is making an impact. And it gives us a good signpost for training as well, because we also put training opportunities through the Choosing Greener programme, access to carbon literacy training as well. So that's been hugely helpful when communicating that sort of behaviour engagement across departments. Obviously, it complies with some of our Trust Green Plan targets. And it engages a significant proportion of staff instead of reliance on individual champions. We do have a cohort of green champions, and some of them are really, really active, but a lot of it boils down to time and resource to be able to do that. So again, it gives another avenue that the green champions can then communicate to their staff quite easily and simply. And it's developed a sustainability community as well. So some of the other benefits that we've got as well are sustainability being embedded in the daily personal and work life of staff to create a more sustainable culture. And as a result, for the success that we've had at Plymouth Hospitals, Royal Devon University Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust joined the platform in November. We haven't seen much of a change in terms of the platform, other than the fact that we now share newsletters and we can hear what each other are up to as well. So again, it'll be good if we can try and get a NHS sort of regional version of this, which I'm working on at present. But yeah, it's been really helpful for them coming on, and they've seen the benefits from what we've had at Plymouth. So in terms of our next steps, so we've currently got about 10% of staff signed up and regularly participating. We will just continue to grow that. Every awareness event, every anything that's going on in the organisation that we engage with, we're always pushing this to see we can get some more sort of sign-ups across the organisation. Like I said earlier, 10,500 staff is a lot. So, getting around to all of those is challenging, and communicating is challenging. But hopefully with the growth of it, it will just start to sort of build itself as well, as people are recommended to join it. We are having some further enhancements to the programme as well. So there will be an enhanced impact tracker. So we'll be able to sort of really monitor more about how this is having an impact on our sort of reduction in carbon emissions. And an interactive activity feed is going to be launched shortly soon. So staff can share photos and what they've been up to as well. So there's more of an engagement and people can actually see what others are up to and again, have some encouragement and motivation. We'll continue to use this to support our quality improvement programs and awareness days and events. And we've recently had a carbon footprint calculator launched on the program as well, which gives a personal footprint, but also gives a workplace footprint as well. So staff can then have a look to see what they can do to get that down. We'll also have monthly focused activities, which will continue to grow. Like I said earlier, Plastic Free July is coming up. We've got other campaigns coming up about seasonal food, reducing food waste, growing your own, and energy awareness campaigns as well. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found it interesting, and please let me know if you have any other questions and I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. That's very interesting. I can see questions have started to appear in the Q&A. So I just say to everybody, quickly jot your questions down now and we'll deal with them after the next speaker.
Sure.
But that's great. Thank you. So also thank you for keeping to time as well, because we're well on time. So now we move over to John. Dr. John Rhodes is a psychologist, which you might think sounds a little bit unusual in a setting like this. John's work is about looking at why some individuals and teams persevere with challenges while others falter. And there cannot be a bigger challenge than net zero, and masterminding improvements is certainly a big challenge. And I just mentioned that John is an author of a book called The Choice Point, the scientifically proven method for achieving your goals. So, John, can you tell us how to achieve the net zero goal?
How long have we got? How long have we got?
20 minutes.
Perfect. First off, thank you to Kirsty. It's interesting actually, because endorphin releasing, like 10,000 I wrote down. That's interesting, isn't it? Like thinking about exercise and well-being, and why we do certain things and why we don't do certain things. And that's kind of where my interests really lie, my interests lie in what motivates some whilst others are not motivated. So in terms of a psychologist being here, Stephen, it's I think we're all psychologists at heart. Like we're all working in behavior change, whether we do it through engineering, whether we do it through, psychology, whether we do it through kind of leadership programs, net zero programs. We're all working in a way in behavior change. So that's the kind of the link throughout. And my background, weirdly, is not in climate really at all up until about 3 or 4 years ago. My background's been primarily in sport, performance sport, working with big performance teams, and then more recently, so post-COVID, working with big organizations, looking at their challenging goals and working with organizations to activate their teams. So it was interesting again this morning, hearing speakers say, one of the biggest issues that we face is the human issue. And that's fascinating to me. And it's fascinating to me because it may not always be a technology issue. I think we've got lots of solutions out there, but it really comes down to it being focused on this kind of this human problem. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go through two things. I'm going to go through this talk is revolving around some research that I did a couple of years ago, which is on two things, which is on something called the inner development goals. We created a scale that measures characteristics and qualities that are essential for people to be motivated or for people to start thinking about personal qualities that they need to change when they work towards these very challenging goals. The first part. The second part is if we can measure it, can we then create an intervention that then hopes to move the dial when it comes to these metrics? So we're going to talk about some research, but I also want to make this as user-friendly as possible, because I'm mindful that what I generally saw a few years ago is C-suites, CEOs of big companies who have declared some kind of, climate emergency, but are struggling to actually move the dial in terms of activating employees. So that's the issue that I've seen, and that's the remit that I've been working with, creating models for people who are going into organisations to work with individuals and teams on climate change. So I'm going to do a bit of a back and forward with screen sharing, and then you'll see me again, and so on and so forth. But here's our problem, and I want to also just say that I think we're approaching this in the wrong way. So I love that we've used the term climate crisis several times. It is a crisis. For some people, crisis seems like it's overwhelming, and that if it's a crisis, then what can we do? We're in this turmoil, this chaos moment. But actually, we need to really focus on human motivation, what motivates individuals first, and then what we can take into our teams and our organizations to then work on the bigger picture. So I have a 7-year-old, and I've said to my little lad, climate change. So everything's getting hotter, and he's like, this is great news. Climate change is great news. Why is that? Because, he says, if the world gets hotter, I get more ice cream. Okay, so when we look at climate change and we say, we think about saving, maybe it's a species, maybe it's thinking about, perhaps recycling, maybe it's the small things we need to really work on. We need to make sure our messaging is very personal. There's personal meaning so that individuals care. And people who come to these kind of conferences, we're generally all active. We are working towards some common goal. There's also the other side of this conversation, where we have a huge proportion of people who are inactive. Some are very ambivalent because there's no meaning behind it. Now, if I said to my 7-year-old, well, actually, what could happen is agriculture could suffer, and actually you may not get your ice cream. Now there's an issue. Now there's a personal meaning attached to this problem. And that's what we want to dive into, is really connecting with individuals first before we create these huge goals to then try to solve huge problems. We try to break it down into smaller steps. Often in these talks, there'll be a point where I'll say to people, apologies for certain things, but in this talk, I'm going to talk about Formula One a little bit. So that could be quite triggering to people. But times have changed, and the Formula One is perhaps the most amoral kind of climate activity. But times are changing, and when I go into organisations to work with them on climate initiatives, now you've got to bear in mind that people who are active are already active. So what I want to try and do is reach the people who are inactive. And we'll often talk about, and I'll play this video quickly. There's a bit of music, a bit of audio, but you probably can't hear it. This is, 50 years ago or so, a pit change. Okay, so as you can see, they are well away, changing bits and pieces. All 4 wheels will be changed, and then on the right-hand side, you've got a more contemporary idea of what that looks like nowadays. Now, obviously, there are more people. There's a team here on the right, and there are 4 people. That was the rules back in those days of how many people you allowed to have in the factory. So, as you can see, Ferrari pulled in, and they're now gone. So, this is important. Why is it important? Because times have changed, but the messaging often has not. And the way that we approach motivation has not. Now, I can leave this video because it's still going to go on for another minute or so. You can have a drink in a minute as well, which is lovely. So that's the issue. That's our problem. We need to change the way that we're approaching climate. We need to change the messaging. We need to change the intervention to suit the individuals who are now in front of us in 2024. So park that problem for the time being, and we're going to look at a measure. So a few years ago, I linked in with a huge organization, the Climate Coaches Alliance, and they're a huge organization which are based around the world. And we discussed this inner development goals kind of model. And this is a framework that has been developed by the inner development goals team. They work with big organizations like Google and Apple and all those places. And they look at these areas being super essential for personal qualities that are important for climate change or for reaching certain targets like net zero. So we took this idea of having these areas and we made it into a scale. And this is the first part of our research. We created the scale with CEOs. We used, I think it was 6 or 7 CEOs from big companies, and said, like, do these 5 things resonate? And they said, well, yeah, they do, but actually we'll add one more criteria. We'll add a criteria around organizational belonging. So we created a scale. It's all free for you to download, and you can read the research if you want to dive into what the scale actually contains. And there's 29 items, and it really goes into things like your personal values. Are you aligned with your personal values? All the way through to, in a meeting, do you feel heard? Do you feel like you have an opinion that's kind of that your team kind of, connects with? So there are questions in there that are refined based on what CEOs generally want in terms of the responses from their employees. So for the research part, what we did is we had this scale, and then we had this idea. We had this idea that we would reach out to organizations around the world, and we would try to measure teams in organizations, and then we'll try to develop an intervention similar in a way to carbon literacy training, but is really focused around imagination. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So what we did is we reached out to companies, and initially we had 2. We actually ended up having about 7 companies. We haven't written the research up yet for the bigger study. And we had to put them into 2 groups. And in one group, we measured their personal characteristics and their qualities. We reassessed it as well after the intervention. The intervention for the first group was carbon literacy training, the traditional standardized way with the person who'd gone through all the training, and they had sessions that were all delivered online due to COVID. And the second organization, they had this new model called MAP. And the MAP model starts with the individual. And it starts with, again, there was a quote earlier on from someone. They're saying, thinking about the future. And we started in the future. We said, right, if you're 20 years on, what would it be like? If you're sat here at your desk, what would it be like? What would it look like? What would it feel like? What would it smell like? What would the conversations be like? And we worked with these teams on imagery-based training to really immerse them in a scenario for the future. And then we played it backwards and said, right, that's 20 years' time. What could you do in 10 years' time? What could you do in 5 years' time? What could you do in 1 month's time? What could you do immediately? And they came up with solutions, and they created systems around where they're going to work together. So ultimately, the model looks like this, but I'm going to give you a bit of a under the hood look as well of what that actually means in the bigger picture. So what we did primarily is we started with the individual. We examined them. We examined why this was important for them, why the training was important to them, why net zero, why climate change is important to them. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not a priority. That's fine. We needed to examine those areas at the start. We then looked at awareness. So saying, well, what could you do? What are you aware of? Have you measured, your the amount of carbon that in a year? And then purpose, like, why does it matter? Why does it matter to other people? What does it matter beyond you? And then we emerged that into the team and said, right, well, what does it matter to your team and your colleagues as a collection? What could we do together? And then what's our collective purpose for like community initiatives? And that generally ended up in action. They did something. So I'm going to show you under the hood of what that actually looks like. I'm going to stop my screen share for a moment, and I'm going to do something a little bit crazy. And I'm going to do this, and I'm going to show you under the hood of what we did. Okay. So this is the general model of what I've just shown you. I've just shown you there are 6 things, and it starts with this understanding of personal meaning. So this is a visual that I would give to the employees and say, okay, this is like your menu if you go to a restaurant. And you can choose at any point what we do, but I need you to focus in on, like, for example, importance. So we go to personal meaning. This is session number 1, personal meaning. And we focused in on identity. Is it part of you to think about sustainability? Is it not? What would it look like to shift that attitude and that narrative? So all the things that coaches or psychologists would generally do, talk about narratives and values, we integrated into a huge structural system that made this kind of this approach really focus on intrinsic motivation from the get-go. I won't dive into all of these, but I'm absolutely happy to share this graphic with you, and you can play around with it to your heart's content. And again, we focused in on all these areas that you probably discussed in depth today. But what we did was we asked them questions for each area, and these kind of became, in a way, the 6 sessions that we delivered to organizations. Some of this also, just so you're super clear, so I've been involved in the 3, 6 and 12-hour carbon literacy training. So a lot of this also is integrated into that infrastructure also. The important part here is really how we connect with this understanding of personal this one down here, personal purpose. And again, we were talking about like life harmony and how this really builds, like, you know, leads to other people feeling connected to you. Whereas meaning is about me, is it important to me? Purpose is about, so what's beyond me? How does it impact my infrastructure and ecosystem? So it could be like things like a family, and we ask people to go for a walk in their kind of, you know, their happy place, if you like, which for me would be Burrattle Reservoir. If you're from Devon, you know that inside out. But it's just a place that's been there for, you know, for many years, that kind of connects you. And we ask people to do that. Go to your place of awe and reconnect with that place, and take your family and take, you know, people with you who you can then talk to about this as well. The team infrastructure. Now, this is important because quite often what happens in organizations is they start with a huge goal. We want to try and decrease our carbon output by X, you know, tons. So that goal comes from the top and it's then delivered down. What this program does is it starts at the bottom and it works its way up. Generally, what we tend to do is we kind of work on both ends. We'll work on the bottom end with employees saying, well, what initiatives do you want to develop? Not for us, for you. And then can you then lead us as well as a C-suite team, as an executive team for a company to try and give us best practice? Because you're the ones that are going to have, you know, you're the ones that are going to, you know, have these initiatives. You're the ones that are going to lead these initiatives. You're going to be the climate champions at the end of the day. So this is the kind of, this is the general kind of knock-on effect, is we see that teams then make initiatives, teams then start to change behavior. And really for a lot of this work, it comes around this whole understanding of team awareness. So how can we as a group of people now impact other people beyond us? And again, lots of different questions that we'll ask teams about carbon footprints and around measuring all these outputs, and really about wider awareness as well throughout. Okay, I'm going to change my screen seamlessly if you can do that one. Okay, that's the model. So we've shown this model to lots of people. We've published also on this approach, and you know, for us it's very interesting because what we've done is we've given people a structure to use all around the world, and it's empirically driven research that coaches, psychologists, people who are going into organizations to talk about climate can then use moving forward, and then they can create a consistent structure to then change the dial, or, you know, move the dial. Yeah. Okay. So our results briefly. This is generally what happened. So the carbon literacy group, they improved on organizational belonging alone. Whereas the MAP group, they had quite a few significant improvements over time, we think due to the intervention, but lots of things happened actually due to this intervention. And then here's our lovely graph to show the impact of the differences between the groups over time as well, where we found a significant difference between the groups based on the inner development goals measure and the total score. So it's kind of, for us, it's exciting to be involved in this area at the moment. And the real takeaways are, for us anyway, is start with ideas with employees. Don't start at the top and cascade down. Okay, it's always good to have an idea of what your organizational goals are, but start with employees and then work your way up through to the kind of middle managers. And again, teams of individuals, they have more autonomy, they feel more freedom to make choices, and they feel a lot more engaged. Those individuals who are not engaged, this is a key thing as well, these activities engage them. So we are focusing on the people who are, who are somewhat climate ambivalent, and we work with those individuals within these sessions to share ideas and to problem solve. Shock tactics work for some, sometimes, maybe. So we need to start innovating in our messaging. Again, with imagery in mind, especially as a psychologist, that's a huge part of what we do, is imagining the future. And I think, I've worked with lots of different people. I've worked with, even MPs, and imagining the future is a skill set. We all imagine in very different ways. So what we often do is we measure their imagination, and then we focus on training their imagination to really immerse individuals on that experience. Final thought as well, just about interventions, team interventions, doing it with big groups for like social change is tricky. It's very tricky. So again, there is a model there for you to use. At the university, we are absolutely hot on collaboration. So if you're watching these things, then please get in contact with us. We're more than happy to share research. It's all open access, and we are happy to get involved with next steps as well. Paul started with a talk. I think I'll end mine with a talk, with a quote. Sorry. I think it starts one choice at a time with you. And not to leap back into the book, of course, but thanks for mentioning the Choice Point book. Choices, I think when individuals perceive they have no choice, or the choice is not theirs, that's when there are often issues with motivation. Empowering employees to make their own choices and to create their own plans and to problem solve is hugely empowering. So one choice at a time, one employee at a time, one organization at a time really leads to that change over time. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. Yeah, really inspiring. I love the idea of sort of thinking about the future rather than sort of dwelling in the present, and yeah, just making the small changes really is probably the key. So yeah, thank you very much. So we've had a few questions in. So myself and Stephen will sort of talk us through the questions. Probably, if you're okay, John, we'll go back to Kirsty's questions first, and then we'll come back to you for your questions. So Kirsty, the first question I had for you was, did you use an established template or examples for your programs, or did some of them naturally come up specific to Plymouth?
Sure.
Was one of the questions from Kurt Bath.
Yeah, so when we had our initial discussions with JUMP, there were a number of activities that we could obviously choose from. So some of those were sort of energy and waste and those sorts of things. So that was sort of like standardized templates that they already had. But in as much as we also brought some of the activities that we wanted to also include into the platform. So Green Champions was one that we wanted to include. So yeah, it's kind of been a bit of both really. Jump are quite good because they've worked with us in terms of what our green plan ambitions are. So so they've been very good at suggesting activities and adding activities on. So Warpit was one that we wanted to put on there just to try and encourage that engagement.
Brilliant, thank you. I think it's Steve, have you got another question?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, there's another question in the Q&A from Joe Dainton, just asking Kirsty, can you give some kind of indication of the cost? Because you have talked about a big old project there.
Yeah, it is. And it depends on the size of the organization. Yeah, so, and also how much you're putting in terms of the rewards as well. So if anybody's interested in having a chat with me after this, then please get in touch, and I can obviously jump in touch with you just to sort of further that conversation. But yeah, it does depend on the size of the organization and what you want out of the program.
Millions then.
Not millions. No, we are the NHS, just remember that. No, it is reasonable, and obviously the more organizations, because that was one of the other things with looking at a Devon-wide region program as well, because the more trusts that are involved within it, the more that we share a platform. So sometimes it's coming together to do something like that collaboratively across different organizations, if that's something that they're able to do. With ours, it's particularly NHS focused because Jump were successful in getting some NHS funding a couple of years ago. So they've enhanced the program for the NHS platforms, which has been really helpful to us. So yeah, so it does vary. But if anybody wants to have a chat about it, then please get in touch.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, we'll flip to a couple of questions for John now. We might have some more for you, Kirsty, so don't run away. Yeah, John, one question from me really is, the research was very much focused on large businesses. I'm just wondering sort of what, if anything, or is there any moves now to sort of shift it towards the small to medium enterprises?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there is. So yeah, the aim now, so there's a big team of us. It's not just me. So there is a team of us all around the world doing this. So the aim is to push it out to lots of different companies. We at the minute we're kind of focused more on the training side, so training coaches to be able to go in and work with organizations rather than doing it, going in ourselves. So the push at the minute is more research, more around the collection of data using a variety of scales to look at culture change. We're looking at culture shift more so now than we have been. But again, like this intervention can kind of, it goes through different, not just for climate, you can look at it in different areas as well. It really does work across the board. And people generally love the imagery kind of training side because it's quite novel. And, even small companies are saying, that is, I say small companies, medium-sized companies that we're working with, kind of who've got maybe 400 employees, are loving this approach because, of course, it's about envisioning a future, it's about teamwork together, it's about problem solving, and it's not just about climate, because they often take these ideas and they can pollinate it into other areas in their ecosystem. So it really does cascade across different problems, I guess, as well.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome.
Steve, anything, questions from you?
Yeah, there's a question just coming from Mandy Burton. Compliment first, saying really interesting session. Thanks, John. Particularly interested in your thoughts on making lasting change or making change last. And Mandy says it's so inspiring to take time away from the day-to-day in sessions like this. What's the best way to keep momentum when back at our desks? I think that's an issue when people go through these kinds of discussions like we're having today, or programs like you're running with companies. How do you make that that awareness and that those good intentions last over a period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I can get pretty geeky here and give you all the inside outs of what we would do, but I think the main thing for us is the reason why we work on personal meaning first, because it's got to matter to you, right? So we generally start with values, exercises, and tasks, and we kind of steer away from the obvious ones where you just kind of have cards around and you kind of, what are your top 5 values? We'll often say, what turns up on your calendar? What do you do that is an action for you? Or maybe where do you feel guilty in the day, or where do you feel anxious, or and often that's a conflict in 2 values when your behaviors are not aligned with, with how you're thinking. So we'll always start on that individual level, and it will tap into behavior change that lasts. Now, a lot of our research, it doesn't actually just look at, although this paper, for example, was looking at an intervention over 12 weeks. We also do interviews for a year afterwards to kind of go, cool, thanks, the scales show us this is great. We also say to them a year after, like, okay, like, so what again? Like, what are you actually doing? Did you move the dial at home? Anything change? And what we find is, again, it's not everyone, of course, but the majority of people are making different choices around what they're buying. So it could be food, it could be who they're following on social media, it could be the clothes that they're wearing. So we're seeing a lot more implementations rather than just an intention. I intend to do this, but it's going to take me a lot of time and effort. They're actually implementing change over time as well. And the best way that we know that we're kind of creating an environment that creates behavior change that is exciting is that word of mouth, right, is great. It's a great selling point. And what we often find is that organizations to be worked with, whether it's usually they're insurance firms we're going to work with or similar, we get recommended to another firm, and then we get with another firm. So it's cascading over time because it is employee centered. And employees often come into these sessions and they say, oh, we've done this before or similar, and are a bit tired of this, or adaptation, fatigue. So approaching it from an imagery point of view is something unique, something different. And again, psychologists, or as I say, we're all psychologists, we're all thinking about behavior change in some way, thinking about goal setting and exploring what we can do. That's an exciting point that we like to dive into, that we do in teams, and teams connect. They communicate a lot more, and they're a lot more driven. And of course, just as a caveat, they'll also, it's never a straight road, as we all know. Some of the interventions that the initiatives that that people have gone to say, I can problem solve this by this, and we'll all come together. Some of them haven't worked. Right? They've struggled. There's been challenges along the way. Some initiatives in organizations don't work, but they have the tools to go again. They have the tools to say, let's come around together, let's reset, let's huddle. What can we do next? Why didn't it work? And I think that's the important part of this kind of map approach, is that you get to imagine also when things don't go to plan, because things will rarely stick to this, that one plan that we thought in the start. The scopes that we have 3 scopes. We may not achieve a certain thing. That's cool. What can we do to debrief it and change it over time? But yeah, it is behavior change that we're working in, and we're definitely not just a flash in the pan in terms of this intervention. It's definitely a last over time, looking at the feedback.
Great, well, that's good to hear. So we're probably going to draw it to a close in a few minutes, but I think we've got time for just another couple of questions, see how we get on. Another one for you, John, from Kurt Berth. So thanks very much. Not to say it's possible or to trivialize your research, but do you think that the methods could be streamlined or made digital, just thinking about attention spans and device use, etc.?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. This is probably a conversation for offline. But yeah, I mean, this is where this intervention, so I've been working with Sol and Paul, the guys at the University of Plymouth, to look at some of these ideas that we've been working on in the MAP program, for the 3, the 6, and the 12-hour and beyond, for the net zero program. So they're also ingrained in that online 3-hour program. We are creating online platforms as well to train individuals in this approach, going through accreditation phases with coaching bodies at the minute. But yeah, I mean, the aim is that we can scale this. Like, a lot of it is really scalable. And the aim with the book was to try and, again, increase some kind of scalability with what we're doing. So rather than just being research, and I love research and data, like, I'm thumbs up. But again, you know, it's about the wider audience and disseminating what we're doing and conveying a bigger picture to a bigger audience. So yeah, so we are trying our best to do that as well. But with all these things, it's just time.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. And then just, going back to Kirsty, if I may. Just picking up on sort of John's point about the masses of inactive people, was just wondering sort of what the trust has as a target for staff engagement on the platform, because I think you're running at about 10% at the moment. So I was just interested to know what the sort of target was.
Yeah. So we were hoping to get it up to about 25%. I think we put in the green plan that was around about 2026, 27. So so we've got we have a target to hit to try and get that engagement. Obviously, it's not for everyone because it is a gamification platform, so it's not always you know, seen as necessary by some, but certainly in terms of giving staff that sort of starting place, very much for a lot of what John says I resonate with, just in terms of that behavior change and giving people tangible actions for them to be able to act on, something that they can actually do. And we visit that in the carbon literacy training that we do as well. You know, it's an individual action that they can take back and do themselves, and then that sort of starts to breed that sustainable action in other places. So yeah, so we do have a target in place, and hopefully we can smash that and keep going on.
Brilliant. I'm sure you will. Final word, Steve?
Yeah, just one more, probably for Kirsty, really. Thinking about the size of your project, you must have got good support from top management, and that's generally quoted as the number one thing for any kind of management initiative. You need top management support. But I was just wondering how far that would really go, because sometimes we see that top management will support lots and lots of small changes, but if something comes up that requires a big change to the business, and maybe for you that would be something like a change to medical practice or something big anyway, would you suddenly find that some parts of the business were off limits, or are they actually going to go with it as far as it leads?
I think that it's getting better. I think since we've launched our sustainability program, which was around about, I think it was about 2022, because we had a bit of a delay from the launch of our green plan to actually doing, because obviously we launched our green plan during COVID. So we've got board level support. We've got a team which work on this, and some of it's badged onto other roles, but it is growing. Some of the aspects that it's really growing at the moment is the clinically led quality improvement projects with a sustainability focus, and that's where we're making great strides. The emergency department is one in particular that have a very big sustainability quality improvement program underway at the moment, but it's all being clinically led, and I think that's where the impact is substantial. They have a great amount of influence within the hospital, and that's felt up the ranks as well as down the ranks. So we try to engage with as many of them as possible, because that's where we make our greatest strides. But yeah, I mean, and certainly in terms of like our green plan, we have some big ambitious targets to be able to hit, whether it's to do with sustainable models of care or looking at infrastructure and energy. So and we have support from the board. And that's the main part of the story to get things moving.
Excellent. I mean, two really excellent presentations this afternoon. I think that's really quite motivating. So small round of applause, I'm sure is appropriate. We've come to the end of our session, and we're right on time, 3:15. So just a reminder to everyone that there is the action workshops, 3 action workshops running in parallel after this. And if you have further questions or want to get in touch with people, use the Net Zero Exchange Forum to carry on those discussions. Thanks very much, and see you later.